I'd like to take this opportunity to respectfully acknowledge the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory. Tonight we're fortunate to have Edmonton native Leigh Bridges. She comes to us from Winnipeg, where she's an associate professor in interdisciplinary visual arts with a specialty in painting and visual communication design, which is kind of unusual. She received her BFA from the University of Alberta, so she's and MFA from the University of Victoria. She has subsequently lived in Vancouver and also Berlin for several years, working as an artist before returning to Canada. Building from an investigation of atmospheric landscape and the optical phenomena of light and color in painting, Bridges' work represents an expanding conversation between modernist forms, landscape, and DIY design technologies. Her work has been exhibited in numerous solo and group shows in Canada and Europe, and she's currently represented by Petro Contemporary. Please welcome Leigh Bridges.
Can everybody hear me in the back? Great. Get started. Okay, so in order to give my most recent work context, I'm going to start with some of my early paintings exploring luminosity and a sense of color field combined with signifiers of shelter, which may indicate the activity of camping, backyard structures, or survivalist outposts. This will lead into works in various media where I've researched solar energy technologies to investigate notions of use, idealism, and our relationship with natural cycles. So this painting is later at the shelter, and it's from 2007, and it's quite large. It's 42 by 70 inches. So when I made this work, I was interested in painting the experience of atmosphere as a type of visual immersion. I was thinking about the slow read of painterly time, and the eye adjusting to the tonal values in the work. So for instance, as the eye moves from the darkly toned lower section of clearly defined hinterland objects, such as the rope, antlers, and logs, it travels upwards towards the luminous center and becomes lost in the middle ground of shifting hot and cool temperatures. Then, as the eye approaches the top of the composition, the figure-ground relationship restabilizes. So the color is quite subtle, and I think it's coming across pretty well in the slide. And of course, it's also more intense when you're viewing it in person, and it has to have really quite bright light in order to get all of that subtlety. But I think it's fairly well represented here. This piece is layabout, and it's just slightly smaller at 39 by 42. With this piece, I was also interested in the tension between the luminous density of the atmosphere and the negation of deep space into the deep gaze into the pictorial space. In the case of much of my work, the long view of deep background space is thwarted through a flat density of atmosphere. This contradicts the traditional pastoral strategy to create the illusion of clear, deep depth, in effect allowing the viewer's gaze to penetrate the vista and visually claim the space. So my work kind of pushes against that. This is Debris Hut, and it was also really important for me with these paintings that the color be unnatural, that the hue and density of atmosphere depicted may indicate a sense of toxicity. And this is Green 10, so it's definitely made around the same time as the first painting that I showed you. And with this one, I thought it was a good example of my interest in material exploration. So the difference between looking at a surface and looking into the image. A play with a materially active surface, especially at the bottom part where there's a lot of impasto, and there's a sense of actually the stencil, and contrasted with thin layers of illusionistic atmosphere. Similar to the traditional compositional strategy in which dark foliage is positioned in the foreground of a composition to heighten the tension of looking through to a distant vista, the competing activities of looking at the material and looking through to the illusion of depth are integrated into this painting. And I wanted to give a close-up because this is probably my most extreme version of this, where I actually left the stencil on the surface of the canvas. So I thought it would be kind of amusing if one could lift up the tent and look underneath, and I had basically a little pile of paint or material underneath it. So again, this kind of sense of looking at and pleasure in the material, and then looking in to an illusionistic space. And this is a collection of paintings that I showed, that I presented at Paul Petro in Toronto. Basically, this was an exhibition called Temperature Inversion from 2013. And with this work, there was also an interest in this kind of middle ground of atmosphere. And I found that when I installed all of the work in the space, that there was also an interesting sensation of a kind of a haze in the gallery, a visual haze that many viewers reported also noticing. And this sensation of atmospheric particulate in interior space was created through the engagement of the viewer's peripheral vision, through the combination of implied and billowing horizon lines. The possibility of experiencing the sensation of hazy atmosphere in an interior space through the mind's instinctive assembly of visual fragments speaks to our long adaptation, enabling instinctive visual interpretation of exterior landscape. And this was one of those called wood panel retrofit. And all of these paintings are acrylic, and I use the acrylic because it enables me to have these kind of very luminous washes. And where I find oil is better for like the kind of impasto areas, oil, unless I used a lot of solvent, I wouldn't be able to get those washes. Okay, so let's see, I think this one is a rainbow ladder from around that time, 2012. This painting depicts the ladder leading up to the platform, where an overexposed and glowing midsection represents a canvas shelter, ropes, and a hoist. With this piece, I was thinking about representing basic technologies to suggest daily systems of those who may be using the space. And this piece, Light Collector, Yellow Orange Light from 2016. With this work in general, this body of work, I was interested in developing a more pared-down vocabulary in which landscape is indicated only by gestural mark in order to focus on the subtle effects of light and color. My goal was also to shift the meaning of the objects in the space as signifiers that in past work may have suggested abandoned camping objects, and often raising questions of a possible dystopian reading in the work. Instead, I decided to explore motifs based on do-it-yourself sustainable technology, serving to connect users to natural cycles, such as Cookstoves or solar panels. I developed a vocabulary of flat modernist geometric shapes that I imagined would represent the potential of tool, in combination with the log forms indicating nature, raw material, and openness to potential. So in this case, with this painting, I was thinking of the rectangles as solar panels. And this is structures, yellow light. So I recently came across Hannah Arendt's writings in The Human Condition, written in 1958, and found there to be an interesting connection in her writings around homo faber, or man the maker. She puts forward the idea that the defining quality of humankind is to try to control the environment, and therefore our fate, through the use of tools. Interestingly, Arndt goes on to identify a natural outcome of this condition, which she describes as earth alienation. This, I understand to mean our progressive drive to use technology to move ourselves beyond our inherent qualities of earthiness. So, in fact, to move beyond the mess and the challenge of our organic roots. If earthiness implies the ability to live freely without artifice in this terrestrial environment, it also means to be bound to finite natural cycles. Earth alienation, in contrast, expresses a desire to escape the conditions of our original rootedness. So I consider this series of paintings, which is called Atmospheric Resonance, to represent a tension between the mess and moisture of earthiness and an idealized vision of design technology, represented by the geometric forms. And In part 4 of The Human Condition, Arndt describes the invention of the telescope as one of the 3 great events that stand at the threshold of the modern age and determine its character, since it allows the development of a new science that considers the nature of the Earth from the viewpoint of the universe. For Arndt, this global perspective and the development of technologies such as Sputnik was the first step towards Earth alienation and the shift in humanity away from our natural earthly origins. And this piece called Latitude Adjuster, in it the form was based on a mechanism that adjusts a solar cook stove depending on one's geographic position according to latitude. So I definitely abstracted it a little bit, but this allowed for a shifting of position in relationship to the sun. I was interested in the idea of a technology which would articulate one's position in relationship to the Earth. And this will lead me into another kind of iteration of this this atmospheric resonance work. This was a more informal installation, and it's a little bit kind of warmer yellow than it actually would be. It's like actually a little bit brighter, but anyway. This was the first time I worked with the idea of solar technology and also started to explore sculptural ideas and to move the work away from the wall. And so just to kind of break down a few of the things happening, in the background is the painting Atmospheric Resonance, so it's the work on canvas, and in the foreground, the folded aluminum color-filled cookstoves. So one aspect that I found really interesting here in the relationship between the pieces was the relationship between the functionally designed technology of the solar cookstove, which is in the foreground, to catch sunlight and cook something, and the technology of the painting to represent captured sunlight. So the painted forms, which I'll talk more about, this is a close-up of one of the color-filled cookstoves, are based on an actual functioning solar-powered cookstove. So usually they're with an aluminum or reflective surface, and they would be used to focus the sun's energy, and so you could cook a hot dog or a muffin or something like that. And they're sold for people to use off the grid. And this one in particular, I just had a bit of fun. It's called the Elder's Cook Stove. So I had a bit of that type of motif, the homage to the square in the center. So I was interested in playing with the idea of color, temperature, and the impression of focusing heat through tone and hue, using acrylic paint instead of the prescribed metallic foil that would reflect and focus the sun's energy and would be used in a functioning solar cook stove. And this was the title piece of painting Atmospheric Resonance, which refers firstly to the illusion of atmosphere and optical luminosity. But secondly, that with this particular piece, I imagined another type of sensor technology, and because there is a natural phenomenon that actually occurs called atmospheric resonance, and it's an electromagnetic phenomenon where it's a global frequency, also called the Schumann waves, and it's driven by fluctuations in global lightning storm activity. So with this kind of phenomenon, the outer atmosphere or ionosphere acts as a drumhead as lightning charges between the Earth and the atmosphere, causing a low, long, rhythmic sound. This vibration is believed by some to have an effect on the human circadian rhythm, binding the Earth's natural cycles to those of the body. And I was interested in the proposition of a machine which would intentionally foreground one's connection to this natural phenomenon. So I moved just a little bit away from the cookstove just for this one piece and for a few of the others. And again, these are the cookstove. So one other thing I liked about this is that landscape is implied by the potential use of these cookstoves, which would be theoretically positioned outside to catch the sun's energy. And as the work progressed, I developed this folded form of the project and also displayed them as flat schematics that could then be folded. So the flat pack version allowed for the imaginary exercise of building the form in one's mind, and also foregrounded the possibility of portability. So I hung them just on a nail, so as if you were in a studio and you could go and pick it up and take it out and actually make it functional. And these are named for the season and time of day that one could imagine that they captured a moment of light. So color-filled cookstove, flat pack, summer, 2 p.m. was in the back. And then the flat pack, spring, 6 a.m. is the one in the foreground. And actually, yeah, the one in the foreground has more green in it. So you can just imagine that. And by referencing them in this way, I was referring to the tradition in painting, starting with Romanticism, such as with Philip Atelier, and continuing into Impressionism, which celebrates or records a moment of light. This Impressionist moment has ties to the scientific pursuit of recording light and to the science of light itself. And these works are also about making an object that carries with it the implication of the performance of the installation and a relationship to the landscape. And I'll show you a video that I produced just this year, a short animated video, a little bit later, that also ties into these ideas of portability and installation of the technology. Okay, and these are a couple of other paintings from around the time, and I call them atmospheric particulate paintings. And they also kind of further this idea of particulate or atmosphere in front of these geometric forms. Okay, so I'm going to give a little background on how I developed this work. At the time, I was thinking about the signifiers or objects that I was representing in the painting, and it was important to me that they would move beyond utopian visions of design that for me represented the idea of a perfectly articulated near future. So thinking about the ideal form of technology versus the flexibility and agency of do-it-yourself applications. And this painting is called Reflective Boxes, and it's based on a cardboard folded cookstove with aluminum foil. And I'll show you that in just a sec, because as you can see, it's very directly related. So I was researching this kind of do-it-yourself sustainable technology. And I discovered photographs of contraptions located in rambling backyard environments. And these projects seem to me to represent local activity and flexibility that I saw as an interesting balance of optimism and practicality. So through my research, I discovered various designs for solar cookstoves that range from this type of simple cardboard box, utilizing the sun's energy, to a positionable frame to hold a cooking stove lens. A little bit more cumbersome. And these design frames to hold a lens from Instructables.com. And these were of particular interest to me, and they were called double parabolic cookstove frames. And I was really curious about them because I couldn't quite figure out how they would work, and there were like detailed instructions which weren't that clear. So. And I was also interested in their formal similarity to modernist sculpture. So I'll just show you one. This is an Anthony Perot sculpture called Month of May from 1969. And so I enjoyed particularly just the kind of improvisational composition and the use of what seems to be reclaimed materials. And so in order to try to understand it better, I made scale models of these frames. And so that was my kind of first foray into looking at this technology. This is called Parabolic Solar Cookstove Frame as per internet instructions, and it's just a small model. And I wanted to understand, again, how it might work, and also I actually tried to improve upon the design myself by making such as this, the revised scale model for solar cookstove frame with a single lens, because I thought perhaps I could get it to work better so that there were like less shadows on the cookstove surface. So I experimented with that, and finally I found these instructions online for this flat folded cookstove designed by Jim Lavoie in San Diego. And I started a conversation with him and asked if I could work with his form, and he agreed. So I took the flat design, and I wanted to make it a little bit more workable for the purpose of being a support for the paintings, for a series of paintings. So I took the design, and these are a couple of iterations, I guess. Finally, it was the one on the end, which you'll recognize. And basically I just kind of shortened the box so that there wasn't quite such a deep well of shadow, so that the kind of color would bounce and reflect a little bit more successfully. And then this is the laser cut kind of supports, and then I would paint on those. So again, as Jesse mentioned, I have a background in communication design, and I spent years working as a communication designer, so it was a natural for me to enjoy and want to work with this type of schematic. And I also just really enjoy the material and the way the light bounces off the metal. And so this, all came together in this atmospheric resonance project. This is it installed at Paul Petro in 2016. And so since then, I've been working on kind of specific projects that are not necessarily medium specific, but I'm choosing whichever kind of media will work best with the idea. So I wanted to show you a couple of projects which are in process. And I couldn't resist showing them, especially in context of coming here to Edmonton, because they do kind of fit with some historical traditions here. So when I was looking at, or thinking about the Cookstoves, I recognized that they were still very ideal. And I was looking into ideas relating to the contrast between the ideal and the imperfect, the earthly and the alienated from Earth. And I was thinking about trying to use recycled materials instead of new materials. So I found these large sheets of rusted steel in a metal recycling yard in North Winnipeg. And I took them and started to kind of pound them out. And then I've laser cut them. So these are currently in my studio. I was also thinking about theories of dirty design put forward by the Dutch designer Mirjam van Helvert around 2013, who articulated the idea that design should not always be about the universal, the new and the pristine, and the ideal, but could be about reusing, repairing, recycling, and respecting traces of history on an object. So working with the rusted steel addresses these ideas and shows evidence of the natural decomposition of the organic material. And I also enjoy them because I've been thinking about my early training here and just my exposure to the many monumental steel pieces that are so prevalent here in Edmonton. So I kind of like them also as a bit of a collection like this. I haven't quite decided whether I'm going to actually fold them or just leave them, but I wanted to share them with you guys a little bit. And so I'll go through that. That's what they look like flat. So each of them I designed with particular interests in mind, and they could be separate or I might kind of put them together. Also, I am working on this, also kind of amusing for me. I've been working on this series, playing with this kind of serial, like Albers format, and also because I remember so well that I had David Cantine as one of my professors, and I loved his abstract pieces of the kind of fruit on the table that he worked so long on, and so almost as a bit of homage to him, I've started this series. And so these are Cookstoves, but they have actual muffin. This is a muffin tin in the center. So for me, that was a little bit amusing to interject something even more domestic and kind of awkward. I found it kind of funny. So I have this series that's kind of ongoing. Okay, and from that, I'm going to talk about this poster series, which I produced last year. And I wanted to experiment with the poster format to address issues of the multiple, and to do a project where I moved away from just a little bit from the unique object and towards a more broad-based distribution, and to also engage with this sense of do-it-yourself agency that I've been interested in for the user or the viewer. And so I created these energy conduit posters, and I produced them last year. And so there are 3 designs, and they're for imaginary solar technologies that would also offer the possibility of popping out the form and being constructed by the viewer. So I've got a kind of a sequence here. You can see pulling out the form and constructing it, folding it. And then I'll show you the 3 designs. They're a little bit light, so I hope you can see them. And I'll just show them here. And then I also have this version, which is just a little bit darker, so for everybody in the back, you can maybe see it a little bit better. But I did get these produced. 3 of them are kind of prototypes, so I produced them just through the digital output and then laser cutting. And then one of them I actually got offset printed and commercially die cut. And I did a stack of 1,000. And so those were meant to be in the gallery that people could take and assemble if needed. So, and this particular one is called Solar Tracker, and it's based on the sundial and also the nautical sextant. And so the relationship to the sun is implied through the potential of use in this case. So ideas around functionality are central to this work. This poster series is meant to offer the potential of usability. It is able to be functional in some ways, for the pieces may be popped out and assembled. However, it is not mandatory for the viewer to literally do this. For the poetry is in the idea that it could be usable. And also if this were to be usable, at the bottom I've got a blurb describing the piece and also a set of IKEA-like steps with a diagram. And so if I were to actually produce this, I would probably need a few more steps because as a designer, I would probably say someone might not, they might have a few questions. It could be improved from the IKEA catalog standpoint. But it does get the idea across. So this particular work is not a description or an explanation or an advertisement or critique. It just is itself. It is an object and an idea, and it exists in the space between the functional and the imaginative. And I also did an alternate version of this for Plan Z. I went to the University of Altea in Spain. I think you guys met Jose recently, and so he invited me to go to Spain and show with him. So I took and modified one of the versions so that I could put it on a smaller A4 paper, and I presented that. And so at the opening, people could pop out the pieces and actually construct the work. And I also created a short animated video that is called Solar Array, and it's 7 minutes with sound. And I'll play you a little excerpt from it. And with this work, it seemed like a natural extension of the kind of motifs and themes I was working with. So I wanted to bring back the landscape into the representation of technology through the mirrored reflection. And so I created a brief narrative which follows the setup and installation of the foldable solar panel. So with this, we accompany the camera as it approaches this wireframe abstract shape. And then we see this carried across the northern landscape and installed and unfolded, and then finally being focused on the sun. And then after the mechanism is kind of focused on the sun, we stay with this viewpoint for 6 more minutes, so then it becomes very quiet. So the beginning part is like definitely active, and there's the sound of walking feet and like crunch of snow, and then it becomes fairly quiet, and there's a kind of a moment of like the potential for observation at that point. And it also is interesting because you start to notice the movement of the sun because of the way that it's kind of caught in the middle of this web of structure. And you can notice then that the earth is actually slowly moving. So now let's see. Okay, I'm going to find the video and play it for you. I think I've got it. Nope, ran And I'll just play an excerpt here. I'll stop it after a bit. I think I should have this installed with pillows or something, so you can just like have a nap. I find it very calming. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. Good. Okay, so the next thing I'll show you is I just completed a residency in April in Amsterdam at the AGAlab, which is Amsterdam Grafisch Atelier, and it's a 60-year-old printmaking institution. And it is in this building, which was an old technical boys' school, and so they took the gymnasium and have converted it into their print shop, and it's a lovely place, and people are really beautiful. And I'll show you, they have, they have etching, silkscreen, risographic printing, and digital printing, and a darkroom. And so they have, and also they have 2 artists in residence for 2-month periods. I was there just for 1 month, but I made use of every moment of it. And so I made I started by making stacks of I did 2 projects. One of them was a series of large monoprints that were silk screened and also laser cut. And I also, these are just some images. I also made this series, it's a series of multiples, or it is a multiple. And it is a photo collage of the cardboard cookstove. So kind of going back to that theme with the reflections of the landscape on thick yellow newsprint paper. So I had that, I had a show at the end of my time there, and I had that in the gallery so that also people could take that. And then I did also this large piece in the back is one of the monoprints on this thick A0 paper. And so I really went back to, again, thinking about like more literal representations of the landscape and reflection, and a little bit of like this kind of center space of atmosphere relating to my painterly practice. And I found it really liberating to be using a medium which I don't usually use, and just really being intuitive as I layered the material of the ink, and so that was really generative, I think, for me. And so this is a close-up, and you can see the schematic that has been laser cut right into the paper, and so this also is able to be popped out. So the kind of white little triangles are actually popped out holes. And so I also experimented with using photosensitive ink, and it's a very kind of light ink that looks like a pastel when you put it on, and then when you put it into the sun, it actually charges up with the energy of the light and changes color. And I think it's a really interesting idea. It was it kind of had limited, I would say, success in this case because what I realized is you have to put many, many layers on, like probably 5 layers to actually get enough material to really have it show. But I'll be continuing to work with that in future projects. And so these are a couple of the pieces, and they're named for like the design that's on them. So this was globe design with static in reflection, something like that. And these, again, were in conversation with my painting practice, with, including ideas around luminosity, looking at and looking through, and more specifically addressing landscape. And so, this is a few more of them. You can really see the design more in the kind of more minimally printed ones. And this is what they look like on the wall. A little overexposed perhaps, but so basically I just took nails and hung the paper on the wall. So again, there's that sense of portability, like as in my earlier works. And another thing I was interested in was just the performance of making these and the labor and the, the kind of bodily work that it goes into it, which I really think is an important part of my practice. And I also had the pleasure of using this semi-automatic printmaking machine. I'm not sure if you have one of these semi-automatic silkscreen machines, but in order to work with a really giant screen, it helps. You basically put this giant screen in the frame, and then the machine puts down the screen for you, and then all you have to do is kind of like put pressure on the squeegee and kind of move it across. So that really enabled me to make these giant pieces in a very relatively very efficient way. And then, so this is one of those pieces that I was then popping out and folding up. And then in the end, I presented these works. And so what I did was I took the outside of the sheets, so the press sheets, I call them, press sheet margins with reflections. That's the kind of assembled piece hanging on the wall. And then the pieces on the floor are the popped out center parts that I folded. And again, the ones on the floor are referred to this kind of idea of folded cardboard boxes with reflections that might be used in a solar crystal. And then we can get a sense of the fabulous material. And a close-up of the boxes. And then this is a shot of the installation. So I think that is everything I have to show you right now. Thank you.